If you love behavioral grooves, if you think that the topics that we discuss and the people that we interview are interesting and informative, and you want more because we only do this once a week, well, we think you'll also love the Psychologist Off the Clock podcast. Now, this podcast aligns with behavioral grooves in that they discuss science-backed ideas that help people flourish in work, in health, and most importantly, in their relationships. So if your once a week fix of behavioral grooves isn't enough, we urge you to check out Psychologists Off the Clock. Welcome to Behavioral Grooves. I'm Kurt Nelson.
And I'm Tim Houlihan. Today, we're talking about something that has been shaping your life since before you were born. And you probably didn't even realize how much this one little thing is running the show.
Yeah, I mean, it's super interesting when we think about it. And what we're talking about today is biological rhythms, your heartbeat, the sleep patterns that you had, even your mood goes in these rhythms, the energy that you have, your performance at work, and even how you feel about your life at 3 p.m. versus 3 a.m. in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
Your rhythms are hugely influential on all these fronts, and we are not paying enough attention to them.
Yeah, so our guest today is Dr. Daniel Danny Forger, or Daniel Barclay Forger III, to be precise. Danny is a mathematician at the University of Michigan who has spent decades studying our biological clocks and circadian rhythms. And he has a lot to say about things like sleep and work performance and mood. I got to say, it's very cool stuff.
So now you might be thinking, why are we talking to a mathematician who is writing about sleep and mood? But that's exactly the point. Danny is one of the world's leading experts in using these complex mathematical models in order to understand how the internal clocks, the internal rhythms that we have actually work right down even to a cellular level.
Yeah. And as the director of the Michigan Center for Applied and Interdisciplinary Mathematics, Snooze Fest.
That's, yeah. Whoa.
But Danny has published extensively in circadian biology, neuroscience, and sleep research, and he collaborates with clinicians and neuroscientists and technologists to translate complex rhythm science into practical tools.
So, Tim, you're telling me that he knows his stuff?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
okay.
He's a smart dude.
Danny's new book, Biological Rhythms, isn't just a history of circadian rhythm research. It's a guide to understanding that secret language of your vital signs, all of these things that we have going on. And here's the spoiler alert. Even if they're not that terribly accurate, wearables actually can help.
Thanks for bringing up wearables, because we are at this unique moment in history where millions of people are wearing devices. Here I am.
Tim has one.
That's exactly that measure sleep, heart rate, activity, and some even measure things like glucose and brain waves. But most of us don't really know how to interpret what those numbers mean.
That is the key piece of this. And Danny helps us unpack that and other questions like why you can't just push a button and eliminate jet lag or take a pill, right? That's not how this works. Why crossing time zones messes with your physiology more than you realize, and how sleep timing, not just sleep quantity, may play a very powerful role in mood regulation and other different factors. Yes.
And as a bonus, we end up talking about Bach and pipe organs and how mathematical patterns show up in music. I got to say, it's kind of cool for some.
Okay, I was pretty lost in that whole part there. But if you've ever wondered why you feel different at different times of the day, this conversation is going to give you a whole new way of thinking about your own internal rhythms and what they mean.
Yeah. And lastly, I just want to say, we want to remind you to go out and join our Facebook page. It's called the Behavioral Grooves Community Page. And that's just what it is. It's a community. So join us in that community for some rollicking exchanges.
Yeah, you can get into a rhythm and go out there every day and answer some questions. Like how I did that, Tim. Do you see
Nice,
how I
nice
got that
segue. Very
rhythm
nice.
back in there? Yeah.
Yeah.
And just in case maybe Facebook community groups aren't for you, well, you can subscribe to our Substack, not Substract. Substack, whereas
This-
and there are links in the notes for both of those here, but just know that you'll sleep better at night knowing you're an actual subscriber, maybe even a paid subscriber. I mean, wouldn't that make you have a better sleep rhythm?
I'm still caught up on Substract. Is that like, is that part subtraction,
It's this
part newsletter?
mixture, it's this combination, it's a new word. I've just created a new word, substract.
You're a linguist and you didn't even know it, apparently. You and Lila Gleitman.
I'm going to get that word in the dictionary. There we substract. There we go.
All right, Groovers, we encourage you to sit back and relax with a very deep pour of your own internal clocks and enjoy our conversation with Dr. Daniel Forger. Danny Forger, welcome to Behavioral Grooves.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's absolutely a pleasure to have you. We're going to get started right off the bat with loosening things up. Would you prefer to learn a new instrument or a new language?
Instrument.
Oh,
Excellent. And does something come to mind?
My son loves oboe, so maybe I would learn oboe too. He's been playing it a lot.
Wow.
that is
Wow.
okay.
First
We've
of all,
asked
it's
that
a
question
hard-
many times, and I don't think we've ever had anybody come back with an oboe. So this is your first here on that.
And it's a hard instrument to learn, too.
Oh yeah, no, I'm really impressed with what he's doing with it. So
That's
he's quite
fantastic.
talented.
A lot of
Yeah.
people choose like kind of wimpy instruments that are easy to learn, like guitar, you know.
Okay, for us non-musically inclined people, that is not wimpy. But all right, we're gonna let that go. This is supposed to be a speed round. Danny, are you a coffee drinker or a tea drinker or a Pepsi drinker? Because I saw you had that Pepsi there as we started.
Actually, tea every day. I'm a mathematician. At 3:00, or 3:45, we have a department tea. This is a very
Oh,
part of our ritual, our day, and one of the great things about being in the math department.
that's
I-
fantastic.
I would have expected that if you were at Cambridge, but you're in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
We're in
So-
Ann Arbor, Michigan. I should say this tea is open to everyone so it's very informal. We just hang out and we talk about fun math.
I love
But
it.
I do have Pepsi with me. So
So for this morning, you have Pepsi. Okay.
All righty. Third speed round question. Which is more likely? Are behaviors influencing our biological rhythms? Or is it that our biological rhythms tend to influence our behaviors more?
of course the answer to that is both. But if I had to choose, I probably would say the latter.
Okay.
It's amazing how much of things we take for granted we don't realize are actually caused by inner physiology coming from these rhythms. Everything from mood to heart rate to brain waves to fatigue, etc.
Yeah.
Excellent. We're gonna definitely dive into that.
We'll dig
Great.
into that. And here's
That's
the last of our speed round questions. On a scale of 1 to 10, how difficult is it, or how much does it negatively impact our biological rhythms to cross more than 7 time zones in one day? Scale 1 to 10.
I would probably say a 6 or a 7. And I'll probably get in trouble with my kids for saying 6, 7.
There we go.
Apparently, that's passé now. I think.
Yeah, now it's
You
all
know,
too
I'm too
old
old
news.
to understand
Old
It's
news.
all over.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think it would have a significant effect on our physiology, but I don't rate it higher because you will eventually adjust, and all your biological rhythms, if you do the right things, will go back hopefully to a synchronized state.
Yeah.
Okay. There's a lot more of that. We are talking to Danny Forger about his new book, Biological Rhythms. And it has a ring to us that kind of reminds us of behavioral grooves, by the way. So we just kind of dig that.
We love
So
that.
I'm just going to say
Yeah.
that. But let's start here at the top. Biological rhythms. We talk about heartbeat, breath, metabolism, light and sleep. What kind of rhythms are we talking about in the book here?
We're talking about actually all rhythms from within a cell. There's a lot of physiology. And one of my favorite quotes in the book, let's see if I could find it quickly, um, is about how we have actually billions of clocks within our body. And that, there's this question of how do we use all that timekeeping to affect our lives. So even though we're thinking about, we start at the individual cellular level, we go all the way up to human behavior, sleep
Yeah.
wake rhythms, rhythms of mood, rhythms of performance, metabolism, and so forth. So the book is very much about human rhythms, and it also tends to focus not exclusively on 24-hour rhythms, because we live a 24-hour day. And our biology is just so in tune to this that we don't realize how important it is.
Yeah, I loved that the component again. You use this analogy of clocks and the number of different clocks that we have. Um, so tell us, what is it about these biological rhythms? You kind of teed it up already as you were talking here, but why are they so important? And why did you write this book? This book isn't a history of biological rhythms. It's about how these biological rhythms impact us on a regular basis. So why is that important?
Because we're at a special moment right now where we have access to tremendous amounts of information about these rhythms. And I think people don't understand how to use that information. We have all of these wearables. I'm wearing one. There are all sorts of new wearables that are coming out. They could measure brain waves, they could measure glucose, all aspects of our bodies, all these vital signs, and we don't understand how, or most people don't know how to link that data to how they could enact it and make their lives more productive. So that's why the back of the book says this book is about the secret language of your vital signs and how you could read and understand it.
Yeah.
So that's really the message that I'm trying to get across.
I'm glad you brought up the Apple Watch. Well, not specifically, but I'm wearing an Apple Watch like you are. Just started
Yep.
wearing it last year, and I was amazed at the amount of data that it's collecting.
Yeah.
So, as a scientist, can you first talk about the accuracy, and so how much should we rely on this data? And then the other side, the other part of this question, at least to get started, is what does it mean? Like, what does having a good sleep score mean, for instance? But let's start with just accuracy. How good of a job does
Yes.
this watch do at
And
measuring these things?
and how are they improving? That's the other thing. Should I wait
Yes.
another
Okay.
year before I buy my Apple Watch?
Okay.
You know?
These are really wonderful questions, and I've been getting these questions quite a bit in the media. I think last week there was an AP piece that featured me asking basically that question. There are a couple other pieces that are going to come out in the next week or two. Um, and it also is a reason for me to say, point to my Blackboard or other things. You might be wondering, why are you interviewing a mathematician about this? Why not interview an MD? And I am not an MD. Let me just be clear about that. But I think where we struggle right now is that exact question, to understand what information can we get from that data. And that's an inherently mathematical question at the moment. How to use that data in the clinic, et cetera, that's another question for another person. But how do you extract information from all these strings of minute by minute heart rate measurements? Your question was about the accuracy. We have done some work to validate, some of the accuracy. My general take on it is that's where mathematics is really important. Um, People tend to be looking for an answer. Is it accurate or is it not? And I get that simple. And I have seen some devices that are just so inaccurate that they're not worth,
Oh,
using. Um,
okay,
but
good.
those are kind of rare, and those are
Yeah.
things you could buy off the internet, and they're probably going to break after a day or two. But most of the major devices do an okay job. And so, one of the main questions we think about in terms of mathematics is when we give someone a number, we also give an error estimate to it.
Yeah.
And so the answer to your question about the accuracy, for me, it's not necessarily saying you don't want me to just say, oh, use this device rather than use that device. That's not what I'm here for. But I think if you got some piece of information, along with it, some sort of an estimate of the accuracy, that additional information is really important. And in general, that's lacking. You see, here is a sleep score, here is a measurement, or so forth. And then you don't necessarily know how much to trust that or how much not to. And so that's why I think with every one of these numbers, there also should be some sort of an error estimate. Example is, let's say it says I should go to sleep at 8 p.m. Does that mean that I should go to sleep at 7:59? I should get very, very worried because I'm not actually in bed about to fall asleep. Or if the device actually is giving you some imprecise measurements, maybe that 8 p.m. is actually, oh, really any time between 6 p.m. and 10 p.m. is an okay
Yeah.
time to go to sleep. Um,
Yeah.
so accuracy is essential to this, but I think the answer to accuracy is a bit more information rather than, companies say, well, use my number, or people to say, this is the gold standard or that is the gold standard, to take as much information we have and also attach to it some sort of, mathematicians would use the word uncertainty. How certain are we, or statisticians, how certain are we about these measurements? So that's one of the things that we've really been trying to do. My group actually has an app right now completely made at the University of Michigan. It's called Social Rhythms, and it'll give you some numbers. Later on, this app will actually give you a lot more insights, but for the moment, it just gives you some numbers.
Yeah.
And those numbers always come with some sort of an uncertainty. An example is someone wears a watch and they wear it for like 2 hours and then they just take it off. I'm not going to be able to tell you very much about your biological rhythms from that 2 hour out of a 24-hour measurement. But if you wore it all day and the device was working well, then I might be able to actually say something.
Yeah.
So the accuracy depends also not just on the device, but how you use the device. And then the third thing, if you'll permit me a little bit of mathematics, I won't go into the equations or so forth.
Okay, be
But
careful. Be careful here.
yeah, you better put some orders. My editors at MIT Press were like, "We're warning you, Danny. We're going to cut those equations," which was actually very helpful. But there were a couple huge innovations made mathematically in terms of algorithms. One of them, the concept is a Kalman filter. And the idea is that I could take a bunch of imprecise measurements, and from many imprecise measurements, sometimes I could get a very accurate estimate of the state of a system. By the way, this is why GPS works.
Ah,
You guys are probably old enough, like me, to remember when GPS was not very good. And we would just have it and it would say, waiting, 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 waiting. And that was actually this math algorithm, Kalman filter. It was getting all these very imprecise measurements and putting them all together. And then you would see slowly this ring, get smaller and smaller from you're somewhere in Michigan to you're somewhere in Ann Arbor to you're somewhere in East Hall. So we could do that with these wearable measurements, the heart rate every minute or every 5 minutes or so forth. The idea is, how do we take a bunch of imprecise measurements and then put enough of them together in the right way to actually say something? Now, just by having more data doesn't guarantee that you're going to get a better measurement. Um, so again, accuracy is very important, but uh, again, there are all these subtle but very important ideas that I think people should know about. And that's again why it's a book and not like a 2-page pamphlet. Now, it's a book that you could, it's a book that, people who are like me, who their idea of a fun Saturday afternoon is just to sit down and read some book on a topic, So it's not, you're not going to have to go back to your high school calculus or algebra textbooks
No.
or anything, you know. But these are some of the concepts that I think I'm trying to, get across within this book.
I, thank you. I think you did that. That's a really well way of stating this, is that it's not a math book. You get into some really interesting detail and pieces about our EKGs and the various different rhythms that you have there, and bring in
Yes,
some really good data around that. I want to stick on the wearables just one bit, and I'm going to bring in my
please.
own experience on this. So when I looked at, or when I had my wearable, it broke, and so I haven't gotten a new one, which is why I'm asking, do I
Yep.
wait another year? But that's a second step here. I would look at it not so much as that individual number, but I would be going, all right, my sleep score has usually, it's usually within this range on pretty much every night over a course of a week or 2 weeks. And I would look for outliers. Like, is there something happening with that outlier on there, or steps, or whatever other that measurement is? Was that a, from your opinion, is that a good way of looking at this, to kind of say, hey, here is my own? Because one of the things you talk about in the book is that we all have individual differences in these
Yes.
rhythms, right? And so your rhythm is not going to be the same as mine. It's not going to be the same as Tim's. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely, yes. So you've mentioned a bunch of great points. One point I just want to quickly check off is this idea of should I wait a year?
Yeah.
And that, of course, depends on what you want from the devices. But one thing people have to understand is this kind of technology pretty much only gets better.
Yeah.
And so much has happened in the past 5 years in terms of wearables. I would not be worried as much what's going to happen in the next year. I would say in the future, what's coming. And you're going to get so many insights about your health, and especially if MDs integrate this into the medical system. This is really going to help with precision and digital medicine. Um, there are so many opportunities for this, and especially as we get more and more signals together, that I think we're maybe sort of where AI was before ChatGPT came out, and then all of a
Okay.
sudden like realized, oh yes, this is actually a big thing we have to think about. We're almost at that sort of moment. I don't think it's going to come that quickly or so forth, but it's really going to change, how we think about these things. As to your second question, which I think was about what happens if one day I get a bad sleep score and so forth. I think a general understanding of sleep hygiene is really important. Um, for me, one of the questions in terms of research I'm very interested in is other aspects of our physiology, for instance, like mood.
Yeah.
Um, how much of that was governed by sleep? Um, and one of the chapters begins, I tell a very interesting story where my wife used my own research on me. She's very, very smart. I definitely married a smart woman, which is great. I was giving a keynote talk in Heidelberg, Germany, for the Society for Mathematical Biology and the European Society for Theoretical and Mathematical Biology. Big deal for an academic. I
Yep.
mean, this is
Yeah.
I'm very, very nervous and so forth. But I also run a center at Michigan. There's so much going on. I teach a lot of students, which I love. And then I got to Germany, went straight to the hotel. The next day, I was going to get up and give this big talk, and I was a wreck. I'm
Oh
like,
yeah.
this talk it's gonna fail. It's gonna be an embarrassment. What's going on? Um, and so what do? I call my wife, and I'm like, here I am in Germany. This is a disaster. Everyone's waiting for it. And she said, take a look at your app. She's like, how much sleep have you gotten in the past day or two? Like you were saying, like your sleep
Yeah.
score, but just our app. And I'm like, yes, according to the app, I got like 3 hours of sleep on the plane. And the night before, I got very little sleep. So it's saying my fatigue is like way through the roof. She's like, what about your circadian clock? And I looked at my circadian clock measurement for the app, and it was exactly the kind of phase that would cause someone to have negative mood. Um, and she is like, forget about the talk, shut off all your lights in your room, just go to sleep, get whatever sleep you are, don't touch the talk, just give it and you'll be fine. And that's what I did. And I think it was actually one of the better talks I've given. So that's the kind of
Yeah.
information which goes back to that earlier question you had about, do we affect our rhythms or do our rhythms affect us?
Yeah.
And I think we don't realize how much our rhythms affect us. A lot of times I found when my mood is bad or I'm kind of upset about something or whatever, there's always some underlying reason that we get upset about things, and but our sleep and biological rhythms have such an effect on our, for instance, mood is one of the examples of these things, that I think knowing that information and for someone to say, okay, yes, there's this situation that's not very good. Yes, things are difficult right now, but because of my biological rhythms, it's going to be very hard for me to deal with this right now. Maybe I should get some sleep. That's how I would start to use some of that information. So when you see those bad sleep scores, you should expect that you're going to have some performance decrements. You should expect that, and we're terrible judges of our own performance. You know, ask undergraduates, they pull 2 3 all-nighters, and then they go to a huge party the night before exam. You see them just before the exam and you say, are you really ready to take this exam? And they're like, oh yes, no problem, and I can see like their eyes are drooping. I am fine, and then and then a week later they're in my office and they're like, why did I get a B?
Yeah.
And
Well,
I'm like, this is what your answer was. And I think right now you actually can see that you missed this, A to B. And actually, if you had a bit more sleep, there are a bunch of studies that came out showing how sleep patterns, in particular with relation to our biological clock, can affect grades, performance, relapse, lots of issues. So.
yeah, these circadian clocks are a big deal for us, aren't they? I love you make a comment in the book about how, and I'm paraphrasing, but it's virtually inevitable that eventually we're going to get to Mars, and it got
Okay.
me thinking about did I misparaphrase that bit?
I think eventually we will, but I know certainly
Yeah,
people are thinking very seriously about it. And let me just be
yeah.
clear: I'm not, endorsing anyone
No, no,
individual
no, no.
anyone approach.
No,
So, yeah.
but it got me thinking about the day. A full day on Mars is closer to 25 hours, and like on the a moon rotation is like 29 hours.
Yes.
Is our operating system, is the human operating system sort of flexible enough and adaptable enough for us to imagine that we could just adapt to a 29-hour day or a 25-hour day rather than 24? Or are we hardwired so much to 24 that it would really screw us up?
Yeah, these are really great questions. Um, One thing I just want to pause and come back to a bit later was you said adapt or evolve. If you're thinking about adaptation in terms of like evolution, that's a great question. That's going to come later. If you're thinking about,
Okay.
if
Okay.
you're thinking about like over a couple of days, this question of synchrony, how can my rhythm synchronize to another, is a fundamentally mathematical one. And again, that brings us to why we would have a mathematician take a lot of these ideas and bring it to the public. And there are all sorts of things like Arnold tongues and types of entrainment and bifurcations and phase trapping. And in general, I think this 25-hour rhythm is hard for a lot of people. There's a lot of inter-individual differences. Some people are much better adapted to, let's say, a shorter day. Some people would be adapted to a longer day. Certain people can't even, keep the standard 24-hour day that we have on Earth. But another thing that the mathematics teaches us is it's not just can we adapt, it's what those signals are. So if you're getting the right signals, if you're getting a lot of bright light at the right times of day, you are eating at the right times of day, you're exercising at the right times of day, your body is much more likely to adjust.
Oh,
Um, but there's a lot, and underlying a lot of this is just so much physiology here that's we've been living with this 24-hour days, for as long as we could imagine. Everything completely changed with Thomas Edison and all those others. Once we got this light bulb, I think our the inside of our brains are just so confused. What time of day is it, and so forth. In fact, I also mentioned we had a recent paper. Ruby Kim, a postdoc of mine, deserves a lot of credit for this, showing that the brain in shift workers is giving some evidence that the brain is actually trying to time seasons. So imagine you have some system in your brain that's trying to figure out, oh, when should dawn be and when should dusk be? And they're working the night shift at an auto plant.
yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then they
Yeah.
do that, and
Yeah.
there's all this going on in their brain, and they're wondering, why am I having problems sleeping? Why am I having problems eating? Why am I getting upset about these situations and so forth? And they're not getting that central question that you began, framing this as this rhythms affecting our lives. So
Hey Groovers, we want to take a moment away from our conversation to thank you for listening to Behavioral Grooves. If you enjoy the conversations we're having and want to help us keep the groove going, here are a few simple ways that you can support the show.
First off, subscribing to our Substack is a great way to stay connected with us between episodes. The weekly newsletter provides you with cool insights that are beyond the episodes, and they get delivered straight to your inbox.
And if you haven't already, leaving a review or a rating of the podcast on a platform like Apple or Spotify or YouTube helps other curious minds discover us. And there's two great things about that. One, it gives us a boost, and two, it costs nothing.
And it only takes a second, but it makes a huge difference for us. Plus, we love hearing from you, so don't be shy. Leave us a review or give us a quick thumbs up.
We're coming up on 500 episodes, and we're doing this because we love the conversations we have with our guests.
Yeah, we also want to do it because we love bringing you insightful, behavior-changing content every week, and we hope that some of those insights will help you find your groove.
It's an interesting piece, and Tim and I were talking about this before we got on. Is like people have lived closer to the Arctic Circle for eons before Edison, right?
yeah,
And so their day is either much longer, or light in the day is much longer, or much shorter than say
yeah.
somebody closer to the equator where we initially were evolved. How does that? I mean, how are we? Are those again? Does that impact how those rhythms work? Particularly, and you did some really interesting work on melatonin in the book too, and just like the
Yeah.
little bit amount of light that impacts our melatonin and others. And I know
Yeah.
that's a whole separate line to go down, but when we look at the variety of how we have as a human species and covered the entire world. And now, as you say, with Edison and the lights and 24 hours, you go to Vegas and can't tell if it's day or night, right? So
Yes. Yeah.
how does that work?
So, just one note, I did have a whole chapter on melatonin. There's really beautiful work on it. The experimental work on melatonin I describe is from other people, just in case
Yeah.
they're wondering. But it is very beautiful stuff. Um, in terms of light, there's lots of interesting that happens. Let's start in the natural world,
Yeah.
and how organisms adapt. Um, Seasonality is just so essential. I mean, this will determine, lots of different things, including reproduction. Is you want to reproduce at the right time so that your offspring have the greatest chance of survival. It really depends on when predators will be around, just that timing of night and day, and so forth. So much of our physiology is wired to that, and animals adapt. There's great stories about reindeers who, when it's complete darkness or complete light, they actually shut off all their coughs. They're like, these things are not needed. They could actually get me in trouble. So I'm biologically just going to like shut them off. There's lots of interesting stories like this, but there is at least our physiology had a lot of time to adapt to that. This changing of the seasons, winter, summer, has been going on for a very long time. Um, and again, now we're living in this world where we think we could work 24 hours a day, where at 2 in the morning we could, scroll on our phones and so forth. And, I certainly try not to, but, I have been known occasionally with a grant deadline or some other thing or something with my center to 2 a.m., like open my phone and check my email or things like this. And this really does mess with our physiology. And another parallel that's taken me, I think, a while to realize is now basically we think about shift work all the time. I don't know whether it's 10%, 20%, depends on the society or so forth, or working on these shifts. What is the parallel in the natural world of shift work? There was not, in the natural world, you did not force mice to be on an assembly line in the middle of the night and turning lights on, nor, our ancestors. What they had was seasons. That they had. So, in fact, this sort of seasonality, this being able to track dawn and dusk and adjust our schedules based on that, is sort of the natural world equivalent of shift work. This physiology built for all that. We're now living these lives where we go across 7 time zones in a day, where we do all sorts of things at different times. Thank you for hosting and interviewing me at a very reasonable time of the day. I appreciate. So it's very interesting for me to see how this physiology is adapting. Where again, we could eat at any time of the day. In the middle of the night, you want to just start eating, you could just start eating. And there's a lot of information right now on, how eating at the wrong time of day, even if you keep the total number of calories the same, there are lots of circadian researchers who have shown how this is very detrimental.
We are talking to Danny Forger about his new book, Biological Rhythms, and thoroughly enjoying this conversation, by the way. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Well, we don't want to end just not.
Sure, yes.
We definitely want to keep going because we talk about moods, and something that we're interested in has been thematic for the 8 years that we've been doing this podcast is happiness. Danny, tell us about the relationship between our biological rhythms and happiness.
A great question. A lot of what we've looked at is different sorts of measures. So, for instance, I don't know how technical we should get, but one of the things we've looked at a lot is something called the PHQ-9, which a lot of people would consider a gold standard marker of depression. It's a 9, question survey that people will go through. And we've had a bunch of papers recently that have really shown how that is affected by our biological rhythms. And what we're really realizing is that it's not just our biological rhythms. And we did have one paper just when you'll take some of these surveys, there could be an effect on your mood. And actually, in that case, we weren't asking the full 9 questions. We were just asking a scale of like 1 to 10, rate your mood. But when sleep occurs with respect to the circadian clock, that for me is what's emerging from my group, from some other groups. One of my students is really amazing. Actually, 2 of them are in Korea and doing amazing work. Jaekyung Kim and Dae-wook Kim. And their work, other people's work, our work is all sort of converging on this idea of timing sleep with respect to the circadian clock. There's got to be some towards this physiology of mood, because first of all, realize we don't fully understand what sleep does. This is one of the great questions right now that we're struggling with. And we spend a third of our lives doing this, and we don't. But there's all sorts of restorative things that are happening in sleep, restoring our brain, giving us resilience, allowing us to deal with stress, to have positive mood. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with us sleeping at the time our biological clock says we should. If we do that, it'll be very restorative and it'll be fine. If we don't, then our sleep will be fragmented. And I actually think we're going to see that the whole physiology of sleep will be disrupted. And the price that we pay for a lot of that is going to end up having to do with mood. And there's this really interesting bidirectional relationship that people are really, and myself is really looking at, between the timing of sleep with respect to the biological clock and mood. And of course, if you talk about people who, now we're not just talking about changes in daily mood, but we're talking about something more serious like bipolar or different types of depression or so forth. So many of those are linked to difficulties of timing of sleep.
Mm.
And circadian rhythm phenotypes. So I think this relationship is very deep, and I think we're going to see a lot of the physiology of mood is going to be determined by these systems, which we're really starting to understand. And I'm sure in your podcast, as you think about these things, all sorts of terms come up, like dopamine or
Yeah.
serotonin and so forth. And those things are absolutely night and day regulated by circadian clocks.
Yeah.
And they have these huge rhythms, cortisol, bam, it's so good you use it as a marker of circadian rhythms sometimes. And so what's amazing about this is you hear all these podcasts, some of these podcasts, get hundreds of thousands of listens and so forth. And they're, oh, cortisol is so important, all this. And no one ever mentions that if you look at a cortisol curve, it's like whoop up and then whoop down. And, they're worrying about little tiny fluctuations up here. Maybe you could have a grapefruit and increase your, and okay, maybe I don't know about those things, but understanding that circadian rhythm. So if you get that wrong, if you have this huge serotonin surge, or cortisol surge, or a dopamine surge at the wrong time when your body is trying to do rest, somehow I think this is going to have serious consequences, and that makes it very exciting from the science side.
Yeah. Danny, you talked about you're a mathematician and you're studying this because there's some really cool mathematical components to this. You also talked how, the wearables being connected with MDs. And then you also talked about this moods and different pieces and obviously psychologists and various different things. How much are you working with MDs, psychologists, other researchers in different fields to kind of cross-pollinate some of this insight into how that's working? And do you see that moving forward in the future as increasing? And where would you like to see that go?
Yeah, and I think that's where it's exciting. My training is in mathematics. I hold tenure in mathematics. But, for instance, I did an experimental neurobiology postdoc. I went out to Woods Hole for many summers to do experiments. Part of my graduate work was, off of it was supported by a really nice training grant in sleep from the NIH. So I think it's really important to have people who could cross those disciplines. So that's what's going to solve a lot of these things, and that's one of the beauties of Michigan. Michigan as an institution, interdisciplinarity is in its core in a way that I think doesn't really exist in other places. The center that I run, the Applied Math Center, is people from I can't even count how many departments. I think I have affiliations in 10 centers across campus, more than so I think it's really people coming together, people respecting, each other's strengths and really working together towards common goals is what's going to move this forward. So that for that reason, I've been very very lucky. The field that I really grew up in outside of mathematics was the field of biological rhythms, like the Society for Research on Biological Rhythms. And that always was an inherently interdisciplinary field. And so I think that, that openness is really quite essential to all of it. For instance, we just published a clinical trial with an app developed by a company, Archoscope, that actually one of my former students spun off from the University of Michigan, and I have a role in. And that was tested in 4 different cancer clinics. And think about how many different pieces, the engineering piece of this, the mathematics, piece of this, the, company piece of this, and the MDs in their clinic, putting all that together. I think is quite important. And so a lot of these things and a lot of like this book is about bridging a lot of those gaps. Now, no one can speak to everything. Again, I'm not an MD, but I think I'm very happy to work with them on a given day. I don't know. Today, I probably will talk to 3 or 4 MDs. Um, yeah.
That's cool. That's good. We love interdisciplinary work. We've seen it at Carnegie Mellon, for instance. The social and decision sciences group is a extremely interdisciplinary group, and we favor that model as well. And of course, Michigan is renowned for it. When before we get to music, I'd like to ask you a little. This is a difficult question because you have decades worth of work in this field. But if there were 3 things that you could say, these are the most important things that you need to think about and be aware of. These are the 3 key lessons when it comes to biological rhythms that you could share with our listeners.
You're right. Of course, that's a difficult question. And let me
Sorry.
just put it out there, that if you asked me tomorrow, I'm sure I would change.
Fair enough. This isn't to go to your grave.
What are the 3 key lessons that you
at
can
this
come up
point
with
in your
today?
circadian rhythm for today? Yes.
Yes. I think I'm going to go back to what you said earlier, that these rhythms affect so much of our physiology that we just don't realize it. That we have to understand how important these rhythms are, and we also need to understand what the general principles are. The fact that you can't just change a clock and fix it like overnight. If I'll get to your point, but if I could go just mention one other thing.
Sure.
One of my graduate students, the same person who runs this company, Olivia Walsh, when she was my graduate student, she made with my help an app that we released for travelers to help them go across time zones. And amazingly, a student project or things like this, no funding, went viral. And hundreds of thousands of people were using it. It was based on a bunch of mathematics. We had a mathematical solution to it. People wanted to know how to use it. They were using this app. We didn't know what to do. The phone was ringing off every newspaper was like calling us. Everyone's using your app. I actually saw a stewardess in a plane once, like punching it in. But everyone was like, "Where's the no jet lag button?" And they're like we were very clear, but they're like, where's I want to push a button. I don't have any more jet lag.
That doesn't exist.
That does not exist. So maybe a second point to your question is that biological rhythms, you can change them for the better, but they're not going to change overnight. And also think about the dynamics of mood. Mood, yes, you have ups and downs over the day, but there are all these patterns and very long, time scales. So I think understanding these principles of rhythms could be very important for us, and that's what I try for in the book. Okay, the third one it's not really a health, or other things, how to make your lives better. Well, maybe, is that I think these rhythms are fascinating and they're just fun. And as you get into the literature, you see all sorts of amazing experiments. Colin Pindrig, some people think of him as like a father of the circadian rhythms field. These experiments where he took Drosophila and he put them in an outhouse in the Rockies and was doing these measurements literally in an outhouse in a Rockies, because the outhouse in the summer got really hot. Then he put a bunch in a pressure cooker in a stream, and there are all these fascinating properties of these rhythms, how they work, beautiful pictures and patterns that look at a sleep pattern. Look at your own sleep pattern. It's just you'll see all these beautiful patterns that emerge from it. So I would say, for people who are recreationally interested in mathematics, recreationally interested in problem solving and all that other stuff, just look at your own data. You could have a lot of fun with it. Hopefully that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, now we get to turn to music, because you showed us before we went live, you actually have an organ, the musical instrument, in your office. And so something that we're going to get to some of that in just a second, but just as a way of teeing things up, if you ended up being stuck on a desert island, let's say that it's a perfectly attuned to your circadian rhythms, that everything
Okay.
is going right, daylight, food, exercise. And on that desert island, you get to take a listening device that has 2 artists on it.
Okay.
You get the whole catalog, everything that they've ever produced,
Sure.
but you only get 2. Which 2 would you take?
I'm okay with one.
Oh,
The answer to that is really easy. And by the way, when I was young, I somehow had this aversion to this person. But now I'm teaching a course basically from his works and performing in my the graduate mathematics course that I perform the organ works of J.S. Bach.
I just wrote it down. I just
Yes.
wrote it down. I
oh
guessed it.
Yes.
I guessed
my
it.
gosh.
Okay.
If you were going to say one and you have an organ,
Yeah.
I guessed it.
Yes. Okay. I will just move it around, and yes, I could tell
There
you
it
more
is.
about that
There it is.
in my office. But yeah, there is so much beauty in Bach, and the guy is so fascinating. His life is so fascinating. I mean, he was at a university town just like I'm at a university, and yet he wasn't formally appointed at the university, and this isn't really fair, but you even could call him a local high school teacher who's composing works that, what is it, 300 years from now, people will be fascinated by. You're going to hear every day he's just writing them down, composing them. I think the wall to his office, something like bordered the gymnasium. Just so many fascinating things about. So if you're interested in like the theory of music or those sorts of things, definitely J.S. Bach. If I had one other, I'm into organ music, so probably someone from the French Romantic period. Lots of very loud sounds and very dramatic things, just very quiet and very beautiful, just to listen and say that's very nice.
So Danny, tell us a little bit about how you're using the organ in your class. What are you're looking at, this rhythms component, but help us understand what you're exploring there.
So pipe organ is the only instrument, a modern pipe organ, where it could be perfectly digitized. Because on a lot of instruments, not the historic ones, but the instruments, you play at a keyboard like these, or a bunch of keyboards, and the feet play a whole set of keyboards like the hands. And every note is converted to an electronic signal when the note starts and when the note stops. That's sent to the pipes and it's played. I could do this on my computer. There's a lot of technology now that it's not actually being sent to a real pipe, but they've recorded a real pipe on an historic instrument, maybe that Bach played. So that's what I am doing. And in class, I'm actually performing. In fact, the trio sonatas, which are insanely hard Bach pieces. I mean, Bach, like, this was a challenge for him, for his students, like, to really perfect their techniques. And I'm performing that, and then giving the students, after I perform in class, the actual raw data of exactly what I played. And I tell the students, go analyze it. You have all these great tools and all this machine learning that's changing day by day. So, and to find all sorts of rhythmic patterns there. So
I love it. You mentioned before we started that you were working on a new project that is going to integrate math and neuroscience and music. And I just want to put a placeholder in your future to say, we're coming back. We're going to be knocking on your door, man. We want to have a conversation about that.
I would be. I mean, I've kind of been working on this project. It's one of those I've kind of been working on all my life, but it's finally getting ready to do it. And if you really want to know something and really want it to be concrete, stand in front of super intelligent, graduate students. You got to know it super well. So they keep me on my feet. So I would love to come back. This has been super helpful. So.
Thank you so much for being a guest today, Danny. We really appreciate you being a guest on Behavioral Grooves.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks again, and I hope to see you again.
Welcome to our grooving session where Tim and I share ideas on what we learned from our discussion with Danny, have a free-flowing conversation, and groove on whatever else comes into our rhythmic brains.
Oh, I love that. I just love that.
That was an easy one. I could have gone circadian rhythm brains. I could have gone with our biological brains, but no, rhythmic brains. Because I think there's an aspect of that we talk about in this, is that our brains, which control a lot of these different pieces, have that rhythmic component to them.
Right.
And the more we understand that, not that that is a silver bullet in any way, but it can help us change our behavior so that we actually have less mood swings, that we have more energy during the day, that we aren't
Yeah.
having brain fog at 3 in the afternoon, all of those types of things.
And if you're a neuroscientist, feel free to go ahead and correct us on whatever we have just misstated, which might be the case. But we do like the idea of rhythms, and we do like the idea of how it works with our brain. So, okay, Kurt, where should we start? Where should we get started in this grooving session?
I think it's about the idea of the numbers that we now have as part of this wearable explosion
Yeah.
that get down to some very specific details around what our body is doing, the number of steps that we take a day, our heartbeat, the variable heart rate, the sleep number that you get. And that's not a bed, that's the rate that how well your sleep
Right.
did last night,
Right.
to
Step counts.
heart rates, all sorts of different pieces. And what do those numbers mean? And do we understand them to a point where they're meaningful so that we can take action in our life and that we're not over indexing on how we interpret them? And you bring up the great thing about sleep numbers, right? So sleep scores.
Yes, because we're going to get them. If we get into the wearable world, we're going to start being impacted by what our sleep score was last night. And then we can over-index, as you alluded to, on this idea that, oh man, I only got a 89, and that was really crappy.
The night before I got a 91 and I felt so much better.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and maybe as Laurie Santos says with the GI Joe fallacy, knowing isn't even half the battle. So we got to get beyond just this idea of and I'm construing that to say we got to get beyond the data, get beyond the very specific facts, and think about sort of the larger truth as to how this stuff fits into our lives. Because maybe it's more about sort of being in the right range. Because if there is a rhythm, getting back to your rhythmic brain, if there's a rhythm, then we need to be thinking about, okay, I can be at the very peak, or I can be in the very trough, but I'm still in that rhythm. Right?
You're in the range that is good.
Exactly.
And there are certain tools, like there's the scale that doesn't have numbers. It gives you green, yellow, red, I believe. Some color coding. Doesn't say I'm 192.2 pounds today, and yesterday I was 192.1 pounds or whatever it is. And so you go, oh my God, I'm going up. No, you're okay, because we know that there is this range of your body. You're depending upon how much you sweated, and did you just go to the bathroom? Did you not? Did you just have a glass of water? All of those things that partly contribute to that weight. And if you're in the range, you're good. You're doing good. Don't get too worried about it. Don't celebrate too much. And it's the same thing with many of these scores that we're getting from these wearables.
Yeah.
Sleep score being one that you talked about. Like, how much difference is an 89 from a 90? And we know from behavioral science, the difference between 89 and 90 is the same as between 90 and 91, but it feels very different to us, right?
Yeah.
And there's also the part that we didn't talk about with Danny, but when we talked with David Robson about the expectation effect, whatever episode that was, we'll put it in the show notes. There was a study that they did, and I'm sorry if I'm misquoting this, that looked at where they ran an experiment where they basically told people you had a good night's sleep, you had a bad night's sleep. And then they
Whether or not
compared.
they actually did.
Right. And so, some of the people they told had a good night's sleep did, some of them did not. Some of the people they told had a bad night's sleep didn't have a good night's sleep, and some of them actually did. But the fact of how they stated that impacted how they responded. So if I had a bad night's sleep, but you told me, oh, look, your sleep score was a 93, that's amazing. All of a sudden they're reporting their self-report, and even some of their bodily functions were responded like they had a good night's sleep. Like, I feel more energy. I feel really, my brain doesn't have that fog. And vice versa. When people were told they had a bad night's sleep, even if they had a fantastic night's sleep, oh, you had a 68. Yeah, that's like, yeah. And then they're going, oh, yeah, I feel lethargic. My brain isn't firing on all synapses and all of these things. And so the expectation that we derive from those numbers can actually impact how we respond in real life.
Yeah. And you combine that with this natural tendency for a precision bias that one difference between 89 and 90 if somehow feels different than the difference between 90 and 91, even though it's still a one score difference, which in the context of things is pretty meaningless. But so we got to step back and actually build some context, and otherwise we're just reacting to noise. I mean, basically. And I would also encourage people to use a little bit more probabilistic thinking. Like, okay, I got a 91 or a 90 or an 89. And like, okay, is that good? It's like 70% good.
Yeah.
That's
80% good, 89% good. There you go.
It was on the plus side.
Yes.
To being a little bit more general, I think can help us.
Framing can make a difference in this as well. So exactly, I think that's there.
Yeah.
Question for you, Tim.
Yes.
Wouldn't it be great if we had a no jet lag button or a pill that we could take?
Because Danny would love to have one. I think
most
everybody
of us would, wouldn't we? I mean, wouldn't it be great to fly to Europe or Japan or anywhere in the world and not have that lethargic, almost painful component of getting up that next morning and not being in your time zone? So your body is like going, what the hell are you doing? It's 3 a.m. We should be sleeping. Go back to sleep.
Yeah.
You're an idiot. Why are you doing this?
Well, I kind of love that our circadian rhythms they're just what they are, right? And they are hard to change because so much of what happens in our body, which influences the way that we think, which influences our behavior, is connected to these circadian rhythms. So, of course, we want to have a frictionless, immediate fix. Of course we do. But the reality is, it's just going to take some time. Not to say that you can't do some things, right?
Right. And I think Danny brings that up. His story of that speech and his wife saying, hey, you're off on your circadian rhythm. What do you tell people to do? And he took that nap. And it's not fixing it, it's not doing it, but there are actions, behaviors that you can take that can speed your body's adaption. I
think it's adoption
in
this case,
of the circadian or of the time zone that you're in, and
that would be
adaptation.
Your body
into
sorry, that would be that actually when I heard you finish, that would be adaptation. So,
adaptation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
I was right the first time, and then I second guessed myself, and then you doubled down on my ignorance. So
I just didn't listen to the rest of your comments.
Thank you for just saying how stupid I really am, and then pointing it out because I agreed with you. There you go.
I shouldn't have judged before I listened. That was the problem.
With me, that's always the case. So you should definitely do it. Come on.
Okay. Something else that came up that I wanted to touch base on was how timing matters more than just totals. And it kind of took me back to some work that we talked about, Sylvia Sarcato and David Cresswell. They're from Carnegie Mellon. They were in episodes 409 and 380, respectively. But it was the core part of their work was about the importance of students getting more sleep and how that impacted their scores. Am I
Their
framing
test
that right?
scores, yes, their test scores.
scores,
So.
right.
And their grade, actually, it was their grade point average for that quarter, that
for the
semester.
for the entire semester. Like if they were able to get more sleep, it actually had a positive impact on their overall GPA.
And it was minimal, as like a 20-minute increase in sleep, and it had that statistically significant increase in semester GPA.
Right. But it also mattered when they slept, if I remember correctly.
Okay, expand.
So that if they went to bed earlier versus sleeping later, you could get 6 hours of sleep by going to bed at 10 o'clock or midnight or 2 a.m. You could still get 6 hours either way. But the students who actually sort of respected the circadian rhythm better and went to bed earlier and got the same amount of sleep actually performed better, if I remember correctly.
I don't remember it that way, but somebody who's listened and knows this I understood it that if you went to bed at 10, you were more likely to get that 6, 7, 8 hours of sleep, whatever your target is, as opposed to saying, I'm going to go to bed at 2 and just sleep in later. That did not help. You are less likely to get that full amount of sleep. But timing still matters. Timing is an important aspect of this, if nothing else, for that reason alone, that you are more likely to get, if that is indeed the case of this, you're more likely to get that additional sleep if you start earlier, and understanding those rhythms as well, and understanding our own behavior around that. And I think he did talk in the book, and we didn't talk about this, but eating, like when you eat, makes a big difference in how your body responds, and does it fit into the right things, so that when you eat impacts, your digestion, which impacts your energy, which impacts your sleep. So throwing those things off can change. So it's the timing, not necessarily. You could eat the same thing just at different times, and it's going to have different bodily responses for you.
Yeah, man, our systems are so complicated. Okay, Kurt, anything else?
So, for people, this is, I'm going to quote Tim here because he wrote this down, and so, but I love this. Is that Edison changed the world, but not our biology? I think that is just such a wonderful, absolutely spot on insight. And it's something that we talked about with Danny, and it just really makes this whole point so much more poignant in my mind. Is our biology, we've evolved based upon, we've had fire for a couple 100,000 years, but fire is very different than electrical lights.
Yeah.
And you didn't live in a Las Vegas or a New York where you can go out at midnight and go, is it midnight? Or, I mean, you can't tell from the light that is surrounding you, because it's always bright. And that's a different world than what we've evolved into.
Yeah, when Frank Sinatra sang, I want to wake up in the city that doesn't sleep, it's a great line, right? But that really screws up our circadian rhythm to be in a place that's 7/24 all lit, basically.
Yeah.
Welcome to Vegas, baby.
And even just like in Vegas, all right, it's 2 a.m. I'm rolling off of my craps table, and I'm going to go eat a buffet because there's a buffet open.
That's right. That's right.
Again, that's not how we were designed. We didn't eat at 2 a.m. in the morning typically, you know? So all of those things, the noise that surrounds that. Again, we didn't live in a world that had all of that noise. So the biology that our body has is not designed for the world and environment that we live in. And yes, we live longer today than we ever have. We are, have a whole bunch of really positive things, but there's also these aspects that, hey, understanding this, it can improve
Right.
how we show up.
Right. And just a quick little public service announcement. If you think that writing a letter by a candle is the same as having a light bulb, give it a try, because it's a totally different experience. It is having a couple of candles on in the room is not the same as having electric light bulbs. So Edison really did change our world. Absolutely.
Yeah. And computers and all of the other factors,
Screens.
the environment that we live in is just not designed to fit with, our bodies are not designed to fit with the environment and the technology and all of those factors. So understand that. And again, knowledge in itself isn't enough to make an impact, but you can purposely and intentionally change your environment. So you can start, making sure that you're not having bright lights at earlier in the evening before you go to bed. You can make sure that you turn your computer screen off and you're not looking at your phone for the final couple hours again before you go to bed or when you first wake up. You can get yourself outside to have that sunlight at appropriate times during the day. There are things you can actually do to make sure that you're matching your body's evolved biology to the world that isn't necessarily designed around that.
Yeah, because instant fixes just don't work for ancient biological systems.
There you go.
We can do that in the short term, but not in the long term. Also, just as a quick reminder, wearables are great. It's fantastic to have all that data available to us. But data is just facts, and that's not necessarily representative of sort of the bigger truth about how we're living our lives. So sometimes it's good to take a step back and try to get a bigger picture view of what's going on.
And with that, I think we just need to wrap up because that was so beautifully said. So, data is powerful. Wearables are great. Interpret it wisely. Instant fixes don't exist for our biologic. There is no magic, no
jet lag
pill,
button.
jet lag pill, no jet lag button. And timing is important of how we do things and making sure that we're doing it. So,
yeah, it's not so much to control the rhythms, it's to play to them, right? To understand them and align with them.
So we hope that this week you play with those rhythms, you align with those rhythms to go out and find your groove.